Overthinkers of Reddit. What unlikely scenario actually came true that you were completely prepared for because you're an overthinker? Story 1. When my wife and I were getting married and looking for a place for ceremony, we have found this beautiful but quite remote garden. We were signing the contract for the event, and I kept thinking that it was quite remote, so I asked how much time does it take for the ambulance to get here. I became the laughingstock of both families. My then future mother-in-law, who was present at the meeting, literally fell down from the chair laughing. The wedding organizer remembered it for weeks, telling about it everyone we met, my dad, ended every sentence with, "But maybe you need an ambulance for that." My wife was making siren noises when I was saying something we disagreed on. Every family dinner, all the aunts and uncles were checking if the ambulance was present. You name it, the entire package. Still, I couldn't get rid of this weird feeling. It would have taken over an hour for the ambulance to get to the garden. After a few weeks, I ended up paying a private ambulance to be present at the wedding. Fast forward to the ceremony. As my wife literally walks down the aisle, at the back of the garden, I see two paramedics running with a stretcher and my dad squeezing my hand, whispering, "That's none of your god business. Let them take care of it." What happened was that one of our older guests got a heart attack and almost died at ceremony. Was saved by the private ambulance. Ever since then, when my wife tells me that I'm overthinking, I just do the siren noise. Edit. Well, thanks for the awards, everybody. Glad you liked the story. I promise you that I was tired of winning after that. They never heard the end of it, but all the laughs were in good spirit. I apologized to the guy's kids for ruining their inheritance plans, and he was saying that the service was so boring that he preferred to take his chances with the heart attack. So we had a few more laughs and trolling. Some of you are asking how much did the ambulance cost. I don't remember, as it was many years ago, and I may not be from your country. But does it matter? Can one really put a price on it? I told you, so you can use any time you want with your mother-in-law. Story 2. I was once driving on the highway behind a car with a couple of kayaks strapped to the roof. My anxious brain kept saying, what if they fall off the car, Final Destination style? I tried to convince myself that it was an irrational fear, but the anxiety got the better of me, and I decided to change lanes and make some distance. About 30 seconds later, cue kayaks, they both slip off the roof and go rolling around the highway. Luckily, no one was hurt, but man, that did not help my anxiety at all. Edit to address some comments. 1. I figured I was overthinking since I don't know anyone else who gets nervous or avoids driving behind cars with loads. But I see now that maybe my behavior wasn't so weird. 2. Apparently, a lot of you have seen falling kayaks on the highway. I don't think this is the same exact incident as any of the ones you guys have described. 3. From comments about how to properly tie down a kayak. I think these were not properly secured. I don't think they were tied to the bumpers. Story 3. Injuring my dominant hand. As a kid, I had an irrational fear of having it chopped off. I spent all of grade 6 teaching myself to write and do things with my left hand. I made a conscious effort to remain as ambidextrous as possible. As an adult, I broke a few fingers on my dominant hand. But it wasn't a big issue because I could do most things equally with my left hand. Anticlimactic, but it was useful. Edit. Thanks for the rewards, folks. Edit 2. Spelling. Story 4. In college, on occasion, upperclassmen would randomly steal the underclassmen towels from shower stalls and then lock their room door, so they had to go to the RA bar asked. I had the idea to stash a towel in the drop ceiling tile for just that event. Maybe a week later, I became the victim of a towel snatching. However, the upperclassmen were very unhappy to see me strut out with a nice clean towel from my ceiling stash. Story 5. I always carried an extra juice box snacks and an extra set of clothes during high school because I was always worried that one of the kids in my school with diabetes might get low and need some sugar for the juice box and snacks, and I might get dirty or my clothes would get ruined, the extra clothes. Well, one day, the kid in my class with diabetes did need the sugar. As luck would have it, a few days later, a girl in my class was having a really bad wardrobe malfunction and couldn't wait for a new shirt, so my XXL t-shirt acted as both a shirt dress for her. Edit. This blew up while I was working. Thank you everyone for the upvotes. May the world ever be in your favor. All of you. Edit. Spelling grammar. Story 6. I carry scissors in my glove compartment. They came in handy when a kid tightened a skinny zip tie around my 9-year-old's finger at a park, completely cut off the circulation. Also, the other kid's mom was a nurse, so that was helpful too. Carry scissors and a nurse at all times. Story 7. The panic attack that the overthinking caused. Edit. I feel like a fraud. I haven't had a panic attack in like 3 years, although I've had a handful of baby panic attacks since then. At one point, 1 month, I must have had 30 panic attacks. I was constantly in a panic attack depression cycle, and my brain worked so poorly that it felt like I lost a lot of my intelligence and almost all of my personality. But with therapy, lots of journaling, exercise, and especially learning to gauge how likely something is to happen when I experience a fear and not listening to unwarranted catastrophic thinking, I've recovered a lot, and my anxiety levels are much more manageable. Thank you everyone for the awards, but I feel like all these people who still experience the panic attacks deserve them. That sucks. Big time. Story 8. I carry some of just about everything in my purse. We were at a beach during off-season, and a kid wiped out. I had everything needed to clean and bandage him up. I carried that stuff, renewing when it got old, for almost 20 years before actually needing it. Thank for the awards. Story 9. So maybe not quite this, but my little sister, through a long series of events, my parents, who were not foster parents and not looking to adopt, ended up taking care of an infant who was not at all related to us, whose mother had just died. It was only supposed to be for a few weeks until she could be moved to a more permanent placement. As soon as I found out that my parents had agreed to help watch her temporarily, I knew where this was going, and I had all the initial adoption application paperwork printed out before she ever got to our house. Needless to say, my parents were pretty surprised today. They said they were thinking of adopting her, and I handed them a folder of forms and my handwritten notes on how the process worked. For the record, she has legally been my little sister for 7 years now. Story 10 went through a stage as a teenager where I thought I was psychic. I know, stupid. A friend asked me jokingly to make a prediction. I told him to get a flashlight because tomorrow would be dark. I grabbed one myself and I got home and put it in my purse. No idea why. Just did it. The next day, the Eastern Seaboard blackouts happened. He still asks for predictions to this day. Story 11. I carry a fire extinguisher in my auto. I witnessed a car accident where the engine caught fire. I quickly put it out before it burned the inside of the car. Everyone survived. Story 12. I am an amateur clarinetist. I've played in the local orchestra, and my son was in the high school band, also played clarinet. Prior to a football game, at the warm-up area, he called me as I was about to head to the game, saying that someone in his section had a problem with their instrument. So did I have a loner? Now the thing about being a clarinet player is that everyone you know calls you every time they see a cheap plastic clarinet for sale at a garage sale or the like. So over the years, especially when my son was in JR and SR, when I saw one of these for 50 or 100, I grabbed it. Didn't happen every day, but at the peak of my collection, I had a couple of beater plastic clarinets in addition to the pretty good wooden one my son played, and Lord knows I wouldn't trust anyone with my good clarinets and BB and A I used in the orchestra, so I grabbed both of these plastic jobs, which actually played okay, and brought them. I pulled the one I thought was the better of the two out of the car and gave it to my son's friend. Meanwhile, he says, hey, another person ran into a problem, and I got the second clarinet out of the car. How many clarinets do you have, was my son's question. It was a proud moment. Edit wow. Thanks for all these awards and upvotes. It helps confirm I really am bananas. Story 13. This was at 9 years old. We had driven home and seen the beginning wisps of smoke for the California Cedar Fire in 2003. Naturally, I assumed the worst and packed up all my clothes and spent about an hour making a travel cage for my guinea pigs. I tied their water bottle to the side so they could drink, packed up their food and their favorite furniture just in case. I then spent the next few hours monitoring the fire on the news and out in the distance from our window, periodically asking my parents if we needed to evacuate. At some point in the night, the fire sped up like crazy and was literally on the hillside across the street. I went in my parents' room and said, the fire is across the street. Are you sure we shouldn't evacuate? At this point, we all went crazy grabbing important documents and supplies, and as we were about to lock the doors and drive, I realized I forgot my guinea pigs. My parents told me it was too late and I didn't have time to grab them, but when I cried and explained I had them packed up, I was able to grab them and go. The house ended up okay thanks to a neighbor putting out embers before they took, but we were gone long enough my pigs wouldn't have made it. TLDR helped save my family and pets from a fire because I was an anxious child. Story 14, Mace. A person I worked with was a registered offender, and he had a thing for me. I told him multiple times that he made me feel uncomfortable and to stay away from me. For some reason, I had nightmares about this dude. He was 6.5 feet tall and hideous. Anyways, he said he was going to stop at a store that I stopped at all the time after work, and it was obvious he knew my direction when I left. I pull up to this store, and he's already there, walks up to my car, and I just roll down my window and spray this dude, and he dropped a billy club out of his sleeve. Everyone always told me to stop being paranoid and stop thinking he's going to attack me or rape me, that he's been to jail and learned his lesson. That dude, he should have never been let out of prison. For reference, I'm also a 6-foot-tall dude who's always prepared for the worst. I always keep an unopened deck of cards in my backpack. You never can tell when some hold'em may be needed to pass the time, but when I was at a business conference, the bigwig who was presenting to us was having to wing it with a few things because his luggage had been lost, and he didn't have all of his materials. He had the PowerPoint deck, but he didn't have his props. He started going into explaining how he'd be able to demonstrate this statistical principle he was describing, only he didn't have the unopened deck of cards he needed. Voila! I was able to produce a shrink-wrap deck of cards. My boss was also in the same presentation, and he was also impressed that I just happened to have a deck of cards on me, so that's nice too. Story 15, I keep my gym bag in the car, so I have a dry outfit after getting into a water balloon fight with my nephews. Also, I carry Band-Aids, tissues, Benadryl, and stamps, which I give out frequently. Kids skin their knee at the zoo, gotta be sting, runny nose, forget to mail the kids FAFSA, or your tax return, I got you. Story 16, when I was 11, I always kept approximately 12 to 15 of some combination of pens, pencils, and markers in my pant pocket, just like having options, and never knew what I was going to need to write on. Sometimes got some side-eye from other kids, though. Cut TO at a weekend camp with a bunch of kids, and participating in a sort of scavenger hunt race thing. At one point, our teams hits this task where everyone has to draw or write something don't really remember, but there's only 2 pens, about 10 people per team, and another team just showed up with 1 pen assigned to each team. It's going slow until you get a pen. You get a pen, everybody gets a pen. Our team screams through the task because we can all write simultaneously while the other team's left plodding along with their 1 pen. We eventually win. Who's weird now? Edit for those concerned about cheating. I believe the lack of pens was oversight, but the event planners, not a deliberate means of handicapping teams. There was a staff members monitoring that particular station, and they didn't intervene. Our victory was sanctioned and still stands. Edit 2, some people have expressed concern over the possibility of my getting impaled by all these writing utensils. Rest assured that this 100 has happened to me. I have absolutely impaled legs and fingertips multiple times. It was terrible. Story 17, I am basically blind without my glasses, and I've always taken a backup pair of glasses when I travel. It went untouched for years, taking up valuable space in my luggage. Lo and behold, one trip to Montreal a few years ago, I just woke up one morning to find my glasses broken. No idea how it happened. And I finally got a chance to break out my backup pair. Story 18, made my kids rehearse for a fire. We had rope ladders, escape routes, and a meeting spot. Everyone should. 11718, we put it all to the test. I thank God every day that we all made it out because we were prepared, overthinking, and anxiety for the win. Story 19, I work in childcare and was working at a center that was so draining. I started applying for new jobs and went on a couple interviews. One time, I had an interview with another daycare and was offered the position. I love my coworkers and ultimately decided to turn the new position down. However, I had this gut feeling that I couldn't burn any bridges in case my current job hit the fan. So when I turned down the new job, I made up an excuse saying I'd love to take the offer, but couldn't because of XYZ reason, but would be in the touch sometime in the future. Lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, hit the fan of my work. I took a month off and then emailed the job that offered me a position and started 2 weeks later. Story 20, my partner tells me I overthink and overbuy groceries because I have an intense fear of not being able to provide for my daughter. When COVID hit and the shops were out of stock of everything, guess who was the one supplying food and toilet paper to said partner? Story 21, COVID. I worked at a medical uniform and supply store years ago, and they were moving locations. They decided they weren't going to sell face masks anymore and were going to throw boxes of them away. I asked if I could keep them, just in case. They've been moving with me for about 5 years before I actually used the masks. Story 22, when I had a tumor removed a couple years ago, I kept the surgical blue vomit bag thing they gave me, just in case, in my car in case anyone ever got sick while I'm driving. Last winter, I was on a 3rd date, driving on the highway back home with her, and she was feeling like she was going to throw up, could not find the blue vomit bag. Felt dumb telling her where to look when it was in my center console all along. She ended up ralphing in a grocery bag that luckily didn't break, overthought, and forgot. Story 23, not me, but my mother. Apparently at a party where my parents and their friends were playing board games, there was a realization that an hourglass was missing from one of the games they planned on playing. My mother proceeded to reach into her purse and pull out an hourglass she just so happened to bring, on the off chance they didn't have one. However, later in the night when some drinks had been had, someone accidentally slammed a drink down, breaking my mother's hourglass. Without missing a beat, she reached into her purse and pulled out another hourglass. She knew the first one, being glass, might get broken, so she had a backup ready. Story 24, I bought and learned to use a Slim Jim open lock cars. I carry one in my car and have been able to help no less than 10 people who have locked their keys in their car. My brother was visiting me from out of town and he needs something from Target. He called me and said an elderly man had locked his keys in his car, and I was able to drive over and help. Also have jumper cables that have helped start a few stranded drivers. Story 25, getting lost in a foreign country. Relying on phone GPS to navigate, data stops working, had over-prepared, and memorized the map of the downtown area ahead of time. Story 26 came for the validation. Did not disappoint. Will forever bring way too much stuff everywhere, just in case. Edit wow. Thanks all. Ironic. I should have been more prepared for these accolades. Story 27, the death of a family member. OCD when overthinking turns into repeatedly mourning for family who are still alive, because how would I feel if I never get to see them again? Story 28, what would I do if my neighbor's house caught on fire? I said ID, make sure my kids were safe and panic, and then would run if the fire got close. My neighbor's house caught on fire, and I sat outside and watched it with my kids and panicked. Story 29, I've never told anyone this, but when I was in middle school and going through puberty, I used to be terrified of getting a random and my fly being down accidentally. Like, I would be up in front of class and then randomly get an erection and it would just pop out of my fly in front of the whole class, LOL. It's making me laugh just typing this out. You know that episode of South Park where Jimmy keeps getting random stiffies? That was basically my life. Usually I would just tuck in my waistband and wait for the storm to settle, but I still had the huge fear of it popping out of my fly because I forgot to zip it up. So what did I do? I started wearing my boxers backwards so that even if I forgot to zip up my fly, my schlong wouldn't be exposed. It was a pain to use the urinals, but honestly I got used to it pretty quickly. Flash forward a couple months, and I was at the movies with a big gathering of people. It was basically a big group of girls and my group of guy friends. Each guy and girl paired up and made sure to sit next to each other. I was paired with a girl I had a huge crush on. We shared a popcorn and soda, and it was a huge moment for me. Briefly in the movie, I got one of those random boners, and I quickly but discreetly stood up and did the OL waistband tuck. When I sat back down, I could feel it pop out through my zipper. Thankfully, my backward boxers kept it from saying hello to my date, but I still panicked and had to cover up and hurry. She noticed, but I think we can all agree that a 6th grade boy's erect penis hiding under a layer of underwear is better than just sprouting out bare in the middle of a crowded movie theater. Also, she never said anything to her friends about it. Shout out Stephanie for not mocking me with her friends. Story 30, my boyfriend, who has zero history of seizures, narrowly escaped dying from one because my overthinking led me to break into his house. When he didn't answer the phone, my overthinking had begun a few nights prior. He mentioned that he bit his tongue in his sleep and woke up with a pillow and sore mouth. But he had no memory of it happening. That for some reason led my overthinking brain to question, wow, did he have a seizure and not realize it? He has zero history of seizures. And we had been together multiple years, didn't live together, but spent nights together, and I had never seen a hint of a seizure, but for some reason, this stuck in my mind. Fast forward 2 days. We usually don't hang out in the morning because he likes to sleep in late, but on this day, we had an appointment to go see a specific dog at the shelter I was thinking of adopting. He wouldn't answer the phone that morning. I called multiple times before I went to his place, but he never picked up. I started getting a bad feeling, but quelled the he's having a seizure thought, because that was clearly so unlikely. Meanwhile, making an action plan for that very scenario, I got to his house, and he wouldn't answer. So in a completely not me crazy girlfriend move, I climbed over his fence. Luckily, his door was unlocked. I found him unconscious and unresponsive, lying in his back with the sticky remnants of foam all around his mouth. I jumped into action. I rolled him on his side to help curb aspiration, put a pillow under his shoulder to keep him in that position, and called the ambulance. Had I not hopped the fence to get in, had I not driven over when he didn't pick up the phone, had we not had plans to meet up hours earlier than we usually did, he would have been dead by lunch. His kidneys were already shutting down by the time he reached the ER. If he had never mentioned biting his tongue in his sleep, I don't think I would have been overthinking at all. No crazy worries about seizures would have pushed me to go over and find him. Turns out to be a weird brain disease that's bizarrely endemic to New Mexico, kind of cerebral cavernous malformations. Several days later, after we got home from the hospital, I got a call from a friend who said the dog, against all odds, was still at the shelter, as in the very dog we were supposed to be seeing that day. I had given up hope on getting her, pushed it out of my priorities while he was hospitalized, but they had forgotten to take down my 24-hour hold sign on her cage, so no one inquired about her. She's now our miracle dog and is the sweetest animal I've ever owned. My boyfriend wouldn't be alive today if we hadn't made an appointment to meet her. Story 31, I was in dorms my first year in uni, and people always thought it was funny that I locked my door at night. We were all pretty close, and I was insinuating people were thieves untrustworthy. One night, I heard someone fiddle with my door, and I peeked through the peephole and saw someone I did not recognize. Turned out he got drunk in the nearby bar, managed to sneak into the building, and tried to sneak into multiple other girls' rooms. Our names and pronouns were listed on the door. Story 32, someone broke into my house while I was in the shower finally. So I screamed, yeah, I get to use my shower gun. All I did really was charge the dude naked while holding a Glock, but the sheer look of terror on his face was priceless. Story 33. One time, I way overthought a concern I had around dryer vent fire. When the time came that we had a clog, didn't know, and there was a wee burst of flames, I was ready. Edit to add, I cleaned the lint trap religiously. I just had a gut feeling. I bought one of those things from Amazon to clean it, and nothing came out. So don't let that fool you. If your drying times are up and there's sometimes a smell, call someone or check every possible location. We found basically Brillo pads of burnt hair inside the heating element. Stay safe, pals. Last edit, thank for the award. My first of this kind, you rock, fuzzy bum. Story 34. Riding a motorcycle. I always assume every car around me is going to wildly pull out in front of me or swerve into my lane. Multiple times these assumptions have saved my life. I'm a pretty crazy overthinker, and a lot of times it's needless worry. But I feel like sometimes it prepares me for something that does actually happen. Story 35. I didn't actually plan for this. It just worked out, but one day, for some reason, I put a suction cup in my pocket. I can't exactly remember why. It was from shower hook that I think broke, and I put it in my pocket hoping to find a replacement or something. Later that day, I was standing around with a few friends, and one friend was lamenting that his bumper was dented. He showed us and said, I bet I could pop it right out if I had like suction cup or something. I wordlessly pulled the suction cup out of my pocket and handed it to him. Everyone definitely thought I was creepy as. Story 36. When my son was still a baby, we had to take an 11-hour flight. As an overthinker, I brought at least 25 diapers for him to go through. He didn't need that many. But the mom sitting close to us was very grateful when she ran out of diapers not even halfway through the flight, and I gave her a few. Story 37. When the towers came down, I was working at a company that markets builders. We saw a drastic decrease in new homes across the country. Combined with a lowering interest rate, I expected a huge financial crisis. We moved from Michigan to Nebraska because corn and beef will always be in demand. Everyone laughed at us. The housing bubble hit Michigan starting in about 2006 or 7. By 2008, it was a depression. Michigan saw a record unemployment. Nebraska's was the second best in the country. Edit fix spelling. Story 38. I was made for this question. I have a weird obsession with safety plans. Always lived in a tornado area. My family was always the nothing is going to happen people. Well, when I felt like I knew what I needed about protection from storms, I suddenly was terrified of an earthquake. I didn't live in an earthquake zone. It was possible, but unlikely. So my obsession moved to this. I researched what to do if you're driving on a second floor, etc. I was keeping a small emergency kit in my purse as a just in case. It included batteries, flashlight, first aid. My dad and I both worked on the third floor of a building, and I felt anxious about it all. Well, guess what? People call me crazy, but a couple months later, we experienced an earthquake. It wasn't bad enough that I actually needed anything for it, but it still happened. Story 39. I had a feeling my entire pregnancy that my daughter would be early. She was due July 21st, and I somehow felt like she would arrive before Father's Day. Bought my husband a pink tie to put her footprints on for his first Father's Day gift. Had my hospital bag packed and car seat installed early. Had a boy jump from a bookcase onto my belly while I was teaching pre-K, which tore an abdominal muscle, triggered early labor, and my daughter arrived June 9th via emergency C-section. No way I could have known, but I prepared. Story 40. I found a nickel-sized lump on my 15-month-old daughter's temple. Freaked out, obsessed over it, researched it exhaustively, and concluded it was a dermoid cyst that had worn through the skull. I was told by a pediatrician that it was a bone bruise that would fix itself over the course of 3 to 6 months. No imaging was needed, and I shouldn't make an appointment at the children's hospital because it would resolve on its own. I got an x-ray done anyway, and the radiologist confirmed every one of my suspicions, but the pediatrician still said to wait and see because that's what you do with dermoid cysts, and it was definitely not through the skull despite what the radiologist said. Made an appointment at the hospital anyway, and the surgeon swore up and down that although it was a dermoid cyst as I suspected, it would not be through the skull since in all his years of practice it never had been. Well, guess what? It was through the skull, and it was pressing on the membrane between the skull and the brain, a hair's breadth from breaking the membrane or pressing on the brain. A couple more weeks of waiting, and my daughter could have had seizures, a brain infection, lasting damage. I overthought it, and now she's a happy, healthy 3-year-old. Story 41. I was supposed to get married at the end of May last year, at the beginning of the year, before any of the pandemic stuff happened. I became obsessed with thinking about all the things that could go wrong and how we would lose our money spent on the event. As a result, I purchased a very high coverage insurance policy for the event. As luck would have it, this type of insurance had no clause that prevented collecting if there was a pandemic. We got all of our money back. I'm also a germaphobe, and so I had already stockpiled masks, gloves, Lysol wipes, and hand sanitizer. Story 42. I'm starting to think that my whole life becomes this scenario. I think so much about how my life could go that I'm kind of drawn to fulfill these scenarios, but it's not like I imagine myself becoming a millionaire or something, more down-to-earth stuff. Story 43, I used to live out of my backpack, and I always thought ID need to leave town, so I kept just about everything in there you could ever need. Oftentimes ID end up having to stay somewhere without much notice, and ID have a change of clothes, face wash, toothbrush, toothpaste, scissors, floss, phone charger, money, snacks, etc. Enough to cover me for at least 2 days without actually needing to go home. Story 44, a couple years ago, I was taking classes at this tuition academy. When I stepped out for a cigarette, back then my family didn't know I smoked, so I was slightly apprehensive. There was a shop nearby, and I just took a quick look at some cars parked nearby. I even internally chided myself for being so paranoid. Imagine my surprise when I saw my mom's car. I then saw my mom with my younger brother at a shop nearby, buying some stuff. To my knowledge, that was the only time she ever visited that particular shop, and it was at the exact moment when I decided to smoke a cig. My anxiety bailed me out for once, although my mom did find out about the smoking later. Story 45, COVID. I was raised around a bunch of hardcore conspiracy theorist preppers, so the moment a whisper of COVID came around, my entire family told me to go to the store and stock up. I had TP, medicine, baby wipes, bottles of water, and lots of canned and box food already and set in my house a solid 2 months before it even made major news. I even had a stockpile of cloth masks. My family all did the same. My therapist said had never seen me as calm and relaxed as when COVID actually started and we quarantined. Story 46, honestly, this whole pandemic, I have struggled with severe germophobia my whole life. And as a little kid, I found out what a pandemic was and was really scared of the idea of one happening at some point within my lifetime. The more I read up on pandemics and their history as I grew up and lived with that fear, the more likely I came to feel it was. When COVID was just a thing in Wuhan, I had heard it could be transmissible for weeks before it showed any signs and symptoms, and in the modern day of fast, worldwide travel constantly occurring on a mass scale, I right away felt like there's no way this thing won't become as uncontained as possible in no time. I right away started to say that it was going to spread worldwide, be a serious issue, and that people here in the States wouldn't handle it well or act reasonably and would panic and buy everything off of the shelves at first and then immediately not take it seriously at all and call you weak if you do take it seriously. Everyone I know laughed at me, rolled their eyes, and told me I'm a crazy germaphobe. And then literally every single last detail of every single thing that happened here in the U.S., from how bad it got exactly, to the early panic buying days, to the politicizing of the virus, and the way Trump used that to his advantage, to how long it's been around, and how things might start wrapping up and getting back to normal a bit if we can vaccinate, all happened exactly the way I called a play-by-play like a year and some months ago. So if I call everything that's happened unlikely really, but at the mental level and even partially the level of resources taking precautions the experts tell us to take well, before the experts began to tell us to take them. I already had mask sec, and with social distancing before that was a thing here, I've kind of been gearing up for this my whole life in some ways. Story 47, COVID-19. I realized in January 2020 this will be the ride of our lives. Warned people, got some laugh, even if it was reading conspiracy bullshit. Then it switched to this will be a couple of months and back to normal. So, back in February, I decided to take a big chance, sign a new contract, and leave my secure long-term job I had back in March. Again, the crazy faces and questioning, it turned out to be the best decision ever. The place I was working on closed back in December. And the one I have now is the best job I ever had. Most important, I did not join the stampede of people buying toilet paper. WTF was that? Story 48, all the teachers at the middle school I taught at knew I was a pack rat. And one day, a kid split his pants and the school counselor came to me and said, "Mr. Theodog, would you happen to have a pair of sweats or gym pants in your truck? YP." So that the kid spent the rest of the day in a pair of nylon pants I had behind my seat. He is lucky because if he didn't fit, he would have spent the rest of the day in a white disposable coverall I had in case I had car trouble in nice clothes. Icing on the cake, it was a student I really liked who was super helpful to other kids and teachers, so it was nice to do something nice for him. I also carried a Swiss Army brand soft-side briefcase, yard sale, fine stuffed, and it had a few of each size of battery. One day, Phil Niekro and 2 Braves players were there for an assembly, and Phil's mic battery was dying, so I sprinted upstairs to my classroom, grabbed a 9-volt from my bag, then basically rolled across the panel and switched out his battery, and got back to the PA, avoiding getting on TV news cameras.